All right, so the object that we are looking at is a mortar and a pestle, and here is the pestle, and here is the mortar, and that's the object, and the subject that we're engaging is economics, and the reason that this object and that subject come together are, of course, various and overdetermined, but I can explicate them in part, at least, or unravel, some of the threads of this continuing conversation involving the economics of making and storing materials and losing materials and losing tools and finding tools and creating tools and the economics of the economics in a certain sense of cognition itself and thinking, the meta-economics of thinking about economics and finding, the time to think and discuss economics and to make objects that participate in that discourse and that discussion. So you'll recall that we've been working with materials that narrate stories of machine elves and their ecological concerns and their abilities to make art without using resources other than their own voices and abilities to communicate in the world and to bring materials and resources into existence. And you'll also recall that a subset of these machine elves were interested in solar power and specifically, had devoted themselves to doing research and discovering ways of storing solar energy, because one of the difficulties that we still have in the conversion of solar energy into useful forms of electricity and other forms of resources is that currently the batteries that store this energy are lithium, and lithium has a limited lifespan and ultimately becomes a toxic and hazardous material that has to be disposed of and in ways that won't continue to contribute to the destruction of our environment. And so, knowing this, the machine elves, have come up with various solutions and have attempted to communicate those solutions to us in various ways. And we've been working with the details of those communications. And in the course of working with the details of those communications, we've been revisiting earlier work and the effects of different sets of economic conditions that have influenced either the creation of those works or the deterioration of those works or the loss of those works in various ways that pertain to making, storing, acquiring resources, losing resources, and a variety of other factors, that come into the economics of art making and other kinds of making as well, of course. So part of the investigation, led us to similarities in form and analogies between the form that Terence McKenna's machine elves take and this process of art making that I was engaged with between around July 15th, 1999, and sometime, probably ending around sometime in towards the end of 2010, that involved, various stages and sets of what I was referring to as performances called acts, and part of acts were the keeping of notebooks that I had referred to as Asylum notebooks, and some of those notebooks involved the creation of Rorschach-like images that I deployed within the space of mental health ward in Metropolitan Hospital on the east side of Manhattan, the Upper East Side of Manhattan, or towards not the Upper East Side, but towards the Upper East Side of Manhattan, and some of these notebooks included images of Rorschach-like drawings that I deployed in various ways within hospital, and some of them included images of a wound that whose function was to gain access into the hospital, and that was deployed in various ways around the idea of what art therapy is or might be, and what some of the biological and and medical and even metaphysical and epistemological assumptions behind art as therapy, what those might be, and the healing processes of human consciousness and body, the idea of art as organism, all of these issues addressed in that particular piece, which we looked at yesterday, and I had promised that I would also engage, via this discussion on economics and art making and its relationship to lost work of mine. I had promised that I would attempt to also talk about one of the Asylum notebooks that might be called Rorschachs, because they resembled and in some ways functioned as an interrogation of the psychometric design of the Rorschach itself, and in some ways you could say that they were a parody of Rorschach, but I never think of my work as strictly a parody. I think of it as a discursive engagement in that occupies different levels of critical modality. So parody in some way is merely a making fun of, and what I do often is take the implications of the object that I wish to interrogate and I wouldn't say blow them up, but I would say expand their implications into a kind of a universe of their own that exceeds so far exceeds their initial intentions, that the details of their textures and their functions and their assumptions are made strikingly clear, and this is what the project was with the Asylum Notebook Rorschach series. And so what I'll do today, focusing on economics again, is find a way of replicating those notebooks. So I had been thinking about different conditions of incarceration, of course, one of which is being in asylum, placed in asylum, or located in asylum, in which your resources are limited. And the way this in some ways corresponds to the work of the artist in other conditions. An artist is always one working with materials and finding solutions to problems that arise with those materials and the limitations that one has, the material resources that one has, the limitations of those, and in connection with the constructs that one wants to build and create in some kind of material reality. I mean, that's true for poets as well, whose material realities are slightly less obvious, right, than the working artist, the sculptor, or the painter, or constructionist, but are there, nevertheless, in the materiality of language and the way that it takes place on the page and the way that it is manufactured into, texts and books and other things as well. So, I don't know what that is. So all of these considerations, were coming into play today, and I was thinking about, for example, being incarcerated in, mental health wards in hospitals, and how practical and innovative, one has to be under certain conditions. So, for example, I was in a ward in which there was a one space available for showering, and you were given a time. I don't know if we were allowed to shower every day or if it was every other day. I can't really remember, or every week. I remember that we weren't allowed to shave every day, and that became a problem for me because my beard growth is rather rapid, and they give you these little plastic razors that I don't believe they give you anything to lubricate with. So you're sort of scraping away your facial hair. This is like, it leaves your skin dry, and you often get a rash and whatever because of the limitations that are either part of the system or imposed on you for whatever other reason in this space of incarceration. And one of these spaces there was a shower, but the curtain didn't work. So the curtain hung in this weird way, and the floor always managed to accumulate a thin layer of water because it wasn't being kept in the space that it was intended to be kept by this faulty shower curtain. So I remember I had an extra T-shirt, and it had a hole in it, and so I decided to sacrifice the T-shirt to make a design that would keep the. It was very simple, just loops that I had created using the T-shirt and the natural grommets or whatever they were, of the shower curtain to recraft, the design, by which the shower curtain would be held to the metal rod, and this was very, typical of individuals in incarcerated situations. Is one example, right? I remember finding a lighter once when I was in a situation of incarceration in another performance when I was in jail, and using the lighter to create ash, with which, to draw on the walls of the solitary confinement room in which I was in, and so to create art, when I was questioned about it later, well, where did you get this, and what did you do, and this is destruction of property, and I said, oh, I just thought all these were art materials, right? And if sometimes if you play dumb enough, then you can get away with that. I wasn't additionally charged with vandalism, fortunately, for creating the art. Although I was subject to a lot of disciplinary verbal aggression on the part of those regulating that space. Um, so, thinking about that and about, the original notebook, I thought, well, I'll instead of, assuming that I have the economic means to create, to purchase a notebook in which to, redesign and demonstrate, the manner of in which I created these Rorschachs in that particular set of Asylum notebooks, that I would begin with the assumption that I don't have a notebook, and that I need to create one before I can create my Rorschach. So I'm just gonna I looked through the materials that I had, and I discovered that I have two recipe booklets and instruction manuals. For some reason, this particular mortar came with two of these recipe book and instruction manuals on how to use the mortar. Well, the use of the mortar is pretty simple, so I don't really need to learn more about that. And the first page seems to be advertisements and self-congratulation. And then here's the design of the mortar. And here's how you utilize it, and a brief history of the mortar. And then there are some fairly decent recipes that I probably recall anyway. There's only 2 or 3, maybe 4 different recipes, but they might be only vaguely useful, and then some pretty imagery of vegetables and the types of things that go into the mortar if you want to crush them. There's a lot of things that you can actually do with this mortar that aren't described here. Like, for example, you can create your own spices. The problem with doing that and then switching back to something like this, though, is that if you're creating like a curry, right, or something that's profoundly aromatic, those aromas and spices actually become part of this porous system. And so for example, if you wanted to grind coffee, which would take a long time in this, and I don't recommend in any way, but then those coffee flavors become part of the mortar for a long time. It might be situated there for upwards of a year. And same for grinding aromatic spices like curries. So really you would need 2 mortars if you wanted to use one as a spice grinder, and you wanted to use one to make hummus with garbanzo beans and various kinds of guacamole and things like that. And I only have one mortar, and I have one pestle. So I don't use it for that, but you can, and that's not mentioned in this particular volume because why? Because it's not marketed that way. It's just marketed for a middle class audience, and what you can do for parties and pleasure, and a subset of those cooking skills does not include grinding your own spices, because economy isn't really part of the considerations here, right? And so it's interesting too, the language used to describe it: a leading ethnic housewares brand with deep roots in Latin America and the United States. I like the way, I don't know what it's intended to refer to, but Imusa seems to evoke the idea of the muse. So that's certainly part of what we're doing today, is working with the muse. So in any case, this mortar and pestle came with 2 of these somewhat not entirely useless, but largely irrelevant booklets, manuals, and one of them, for some reason, already has a wax. This is a wax coating here. It must be from one of these candles. So I don't think that I need two of them. I'm never going to be doing anything that I can. This mortar and pestle can't be in two places at the same time. So even though these books can, they're irrelevant since I only have one mortar and one pestle. So I think I can sacrifice one of these the same way that I sacrificed my T-shirt to make a better hanger for the faulty shower curtain in Metropolitan Hospital that was creating a safety hazard on the floor, and that wasn't addressed by the staff as an issue of concern, and then we'll use this as the material basis for a notebook. So first we'll have to create the notebook, and that will probably be enough for today, because our glue will have to dry, if this is even usable glue, because I'm using this glue stick that I believe belonged to my mother, who passed from this realm at the beginning of 2016. So that's already quite a few years ago, and I inherited this glue stick actually in 2016. After she died, and I had to take over her house and her belongings, and somehow this glue stick managed to survive several moves and relocations since that time. So it may or may not, it's purple, it may or may not work. The difficulty too in the craft project will be that I only have two hands. Well, it still comes up. The mechanical rotating screw that pushes it forward, in that lipstick-like manner, still functions. So it's probably dry. We'll see if it actually works, but it may or may not. Another difficulty of resources that we'll have is the resource of having only two arms and two sets of hands. And because I'm filming this at the same time that I'm creating it, so look at our materials. Our materials are, because I'm filming it at the same time that I'm creating it. My technical abilities, which are already very limited in terms of making craft, will be even more limited. And then I thought that I'm going to turn this into a notebook, and I thought I would use the back side of these, because that's another example of recycling. And you will recall these images are the images of J.K. Rowling volumes of the Harry Potter series that were used in a pronoun sorting exercise that belonged to a piece called a pronoun sorting and loving performance, or a pronoun and loving sorting performance, or something for Alan Capro, that began with a memory of Alan's correction of my use of the pronoun she in referring to the viewing subject's positionality in looking at some early pieces by Yoko Ono. and he preferred the pronoun he as a kind of like a universal pronoun. And you'll recall that, you know, this pronoun issue is become relevant again today in relationship to individuals like J.K. Rowling, who also has her preferred pronouns. So these pronouns that we use to sort these Harry Potter volumes were what I referred to as pronouns of biological necessity, and they included things like respirate and cogitate and ingest, and I think as much as possible I tried to have the same Latin endings on each of them, 8, but I don't remember what digest was. But all of these pronouns, I think there were, I can't remember now, 9 perhaps pronouns of biological necessity, and there were only 8 of these volumes of Harry Potter, or I may have the numbers wrong, but I do recall that there were more pronouns of biological necessity than we had volumes of Harry Potter, and so not all of the pronouns of biological necessity were utilized. And in particular, I remember that urinate, I think, was not utilized and got assigned to one of my dogs because he was sitting by that particular pronoun, and he's out here somewhere. Or maybe, yeah, there he is. He had asked to come outside. There you are. Want to come back in? Because of his need to urinate. And now he can come back in. All right, so those are some of our economic and technical limitations that have been set up. You might think of these limitations in a way as constraints, in the same way that, you know, say that you're writing a sonnet, right? You could say that a sonnet has certain rules that you know, and there are different kinds of sonnets, right? There's, you know, Petrarchian sonnets and there's Shakespearean sonnets, and some people think they're very clever for knowing which is which, and it's all very simple, and you know. But anyway, so you have 3 or 4 stanzas if you count the little couplet ditty at the end as an actual stanza, or whether you include it in the last stanza as a variation on the form of the 3 stanzas. But that's a certain amount of ambiguity that, you know, makes, you know, the cognitive representation of the sonnet, you know, somewhat interesting, right? So you have, you know, constraints around, you know, sometimes, you know, you factor in meter, which would be iambic pentameter, but you could vary that if you wanted to. You could throw into the soup. You could make, just like with this, right? Like you wouldn't have to do this with whatever's in here. It's like, looks like avocado, onion. I think that the yellow pieces are papaya. There may be cilantro, but if I wanted to, I could throw in some red bell pepper, right? So you wouldn't have to do the sonnet, you know, iambic pentameter. You could mix it up. You could do a trochaic if you wanted to, right? And you could still, you know, call it a sonnet. And you know, same with the rhyme scheme. You wouldn't have to do, you know, A, B, A, B, C, D, C, D, or you wouldn't have to go A, B, B, A, you know, C, D, D, C. You could You could go A, B, D, A, B, C, D, and then you could go again, A, B, C, D, and then you could go again, A, B, C, D, and you would still have, a rhymed sonnet, but you would have, bell pepper, or you would have whatever in here that you decided to add. So, one of the things with forms like this is sometimes people who are literal minded will think, well, the form is represented, it's either Shakespearean or if it's Petrarchian, and but those are just names, right? That get attached to these conventionalized ways of this form that actually allows for a lot of different variation, right? So you can do a free verse sonnet, you could put whatever meter in it you wanted, or you could vary and alternate the meter. The fact that the rhyme scheme breaks at the end suggests that any kind of variation in the last two lines, or even in lines towards the end, whether they're a couplet or not, will conceptually mirror and correspond to the practical constraints that define the sonnet, right? And you could even imagine a kind of double sonnet, or a sonnet that runs across 2 pages that instead of having 3 sets of stanzas of 4 lines and a couplet at the bottom, consisting of a totality of 14 lines, you could imagine that running across 2 pages, you have 2 sets of stanzas representing the same number but doubled, right? So a total of 24, and your double sonnet would certainly be a sonnet, but might not be recognized by a literal-minded person looking for the Shakespearean or the Petrarchian or whatever else. So anyway, all of that, is to the point in understanding our use of materials, right? So these materials, one could think of as constraints in a certain way, and they're not formalized constraints like the constraints of a sonnet, and they're not over-literalized constraints like the constraints of a sonnet. But they represent the meta-economical constraints out of which, the playfulness of forms, emerge, right? So one of the things about limited resources and having to work with limited resources is it gives rise to invention, right? Necessity is the mother of invention, and then invention in turn gets codified, one could say, or literalized in this prescriptive way, rather than being descriptive of an economic reality or a way of working that has practical purposes that it accomplishes, as in most ergic design. For example, this pestle is the right size. Not only does it crush, right, but it's the right size designed for a human hand, so it has certain practicality, right? So, but if you lose track of that and over reify, the formal design, you can lose track of its practical function. So this is designed for cooking, and we don't want to confuse it with something that's not. But other kinds of art, was originally designed to interface with processes in the world and to challenge and change the conditions under which we live, or to sustain the growth of crops, or to be significant in the life cycle of an individual, passing from child to adulthood, or of a group of individuals coming together as a collective, or whatever. So keeping those practical functions in mind, and not overemphasizing the simply formal aesthetic reification of these designs. We could think of these materials as being our constraints for a kind of building that isn't yet codified. This isn't the way to make a Shakespearean notebook or a Petrarchian notebook, but could become the way of making an I Musa notebook, right? If we wanted to, over codify and over distribute the laws of, in which this type of making is made, and not see it as, the kind of initial, having the initial functional value and improvisatory playfulness that it did. All right, so again, the difficulty comes in you know what? I'm going to need another. I can see already that I'm going to need more materials. So I'm going to need a pencil because, and I wouldn't need the pencil. I could do it by hand. This is the desktop ekphrasis for the day. I wouldn't need the pencil if I had 2 more sets of hands and arms, but since I don't, I will. All right, so and if any of my viewers or audience think that this is going to be a demonstration of my impressive technical ability at craft, you'll be sadly disappointed because that's in no way, shape, or form what's going to happen here. All right, and I've given myself some marks because of the difficulty of cutting and filming at the same time. Let's see how well this glue stick has survived. It still slides. You have to excuse the bumps in the audio recording. I haven't figured out a way to apply the glue stick without I've got too big a piece here now. I haven't figured out a way to apply the glue stick without running into some trouble. All right, so that's going to be the cover. Now, obviously, if we had more arms and hands, this would be a lot simpler. But not all of us have the ablest, physical bodies and resources, physical resources that others of us have, and so are forced to recognize the economic limitations of some of those constraints as well. Now, hopefully I can get 2 of these. Yeah, I think I can. Out of a single page. So while I'm doing this and constructing the IMUSA notebook, which is, again, an improvisatory notebook. Okay, well, I've got, I'm baking squash as well at this time, and this is for a Southwest casserole. I hadn't intended to make a casserole for next week, but I got this notice, which is also economic because it's part of the infrastructure here on the Navajo Nation. But Window Rock Unified School District number 8, and this is for us, and they basically they left this on our door. So NTUA, which is the infrastructure facility that provides both electrical power and water, and basically all the facilities usage here on the Navajo Nation, is going to be working on the water lines in the area here. And so all of next week, beginning on Monday, between 8 a.m. and 5 p.m., we won't have water. And so I thought, well, if I create, this is a Saturday, and I just started soaking beans, and I'll be able to cook those beans tomorrow. And if I create this casserole, then all I have to do is heat it up beginning at 5 every day, and I won't have to cook, so we won't be eating too late. But you always need water when you're cooking, and we'll store some extra water so that we'll be able to flush the toilets with the stored water just by pouring them into the toilets, and we'll have some drinking water, because usually if you're working on the pipes for this long, you have to clean the pipes out, by running, water through them, and we don't want to waste water every day for, 5 days in a row by doing that. So we'll have dirty water for about a week, right? So that's why I thought of, making the casserole. And dogs seem to want to go outside. Want to go outside? And probably some other animal making noise out there. You going, Leo, or are you staying inside? Leo's he can't make up his mind. There he goes. All right, they're gonna just talk to their friends a little bit. He'll probably want to come in almost immediately. Fiverr stays out sometimes, but Leo usually likes to come back in. Yeah, here he comes. That wasn't interesting enough. So I thought, there's some bread that Lori made. So I thought that, I have some leftovers. Specifically, I have, this is a combination of Mexican style rice and some chipotle potatoes, and then I have some. This is couscous, and usually I make this casserole by combining cooked beans with potatoes, and combining the cooked squash with rice, and then those are 2 layers in the casserole. And but I thought since I had the couscous that I would combine the cooked squash with the leftover couscous, and then add some fried peppers and fried onions, and combine the cooked chili beans with the rice and potato combination, and those would be the 2 layers. And so to facilitate that, which I'll make tomorrow, I've got the beans soaking today, and I've also got I've got the squash that I've cooked in the electric oven today, and I'll put all those ingredients together with some lasagna noodles and some pasta sauce, and that'll be ready for Monday. And then when we have dinner, through at least the first 3 days in the week, we won't have water until 5 o'clock, but I can reheat that casserole up in about a half an hour, so we won't be eating too late. Some people complain about not having water and stuff during that time, but my experience, since I lived for over a year without access to hot water, when I made the mistake of buying a home in Julian, California, having hot water at all available, it's actually quite a privilege, and I'm not in the position at this time to complain about anything. All right, so we have the cover, we have the first page, and this glue is working fine. So I don't really intend to be an advertisement for Elmer's glue, and I hope that it's not made with any animal products. I didn't even check that, but like I said, I didn't purchase it, I inherited it. So it does have a cow on it. I don't know what that means. It says that it's a choking hazard. I can't find the ingredients. They may not put them. So I think I had begun in the process before having the small interruptions. With the cooking and the dogs, I think I had begun to talk a little bit about how I utilize, the initial Rorschach notebook, since that's what we're creating, is a copy or version of that notebook, and I don't know how I'm going to replicate its performative value. I think I've done this wrong. Misconceptualized somehow I misconceptualized the lengths here. Probably because I'm doing so many things at the same time. I'm trying to narrate the story. So so this is also an economy, right? The economy of performance. I'm trying to narrate the story of how I used the initial set of Rorschachs while I'm making this, so that my audience won't be bored watching me in silence design this notebook. And in the process of doing that, I visually miscalculated, misimprovised the dimensions that I needed to build this page. And then, of course, I was interrupted by the other works that I'm doing at the same time, which is, taking care of the dogs and building the casserole. And the building of the casserole, wouldn't be required at this time. Obviously wouldn't be required at this time, had we not received, this message yesterday afternoon. And, I'm somewhat limited in my time constraints because it is Saturday now. And if I want this casserole idea that I have to work, I have to finish that, make the casserole by the end of tomorrow, or at least get it in the oven, because it takes about 3 hours in the oven, or 2 to 3 hours in the oven. At least get it in the oven tomorrow before, or Monday before. I don't really like the way that one came out, but I think it's all right. Not going to be too picky. I guess I could see if I can do this one any better. Now it doesn't want to come up, so I think now I'm stuck. But obviously, if the water weren't being shut off tomorrow, Monday, then then I wouldn't have to be doing that and this at the same time. But that's again part of a larger economic circle that belongs to the limited resources here and and the conditions under which whole communities live and operate. Sometimes he barks because he wants to come in, and sometimes he barks just because he's, talking to the other dogs. I think if I ask him to come in, he'll refuse, but we can try. 5, you want to come in? I can bribe him, and that'll get him to come in, and that might be useful. So he won't come in if I ask him to. But if I bribe him, he'll come in. And he doesn't respond really very well to threats, but, like a raised voice or something like that. But if I bribe him, he'll come in. 5, want a biscuit? Biscuit. There you go. See how easy that is? But I hate to do it because it just reinforces the I can do whatever I want and then I'll get a biscuit behavior. But I'm already distracted enough by everything else that's going on, and then his barking on top of all of that, makes continuing with the measurement a little more difficult. So again, this is a lot easier if one has 2 hands. And we can't take for granted that we will always have 2 hands, or that it really does. We just get the little ones because we do use them as a bribe. So they're not really intended to be all that, nourishing or sustaining, but rather just, this kind of a practical solution set to the problem of particularly this one, Fiverr's, inability to respond to commands. Leo's actually really good. We've had him since he was a pup. I found him. I've repeated this story quite often, but Fiverr, because I found him lying on the side of the road after he had been hit by a vehicle and left for dead there. He's actually extraordinarily spoiled and and really only responds to rewards, not to threatening verbal commands in any way, shape, or form. Leo thinks he might get another one. Well, it takes longer than you would think to make a makeshift notebook that we'll use later to repeat the construction or a version of the construction of the Rorschach notebook. And I'm approaching what another resource limit is, which is time. And the reason that this is a resource limit is if I create any work that's longer than an hour and a half, longer than an hour, to put up on the YouTube channel that I have, I'll have a real difficult time getting it up. And even at an hour, it'll take me about a day to get it up. And this is because, again, resources here on the Navajo Nation and the limitations that we have in terms of Wi-Fi access and speed, which is another infrastructure issue that, if you don't live with, you don't really understand the full ramifications of, in terms of, particularly now under the restrictions with COVID and all of the Zoom and other formats that people utilize to communicate that rely on technology and I think I've skipped a page. Oh well, it doesn't matter. This isn't sequentially significant activity. But anyway, that's the length that I have available for creating a representation of this making activity is also limited in terms of time because of the limitations of the infrastructure, given internet access here. And so, as I approach an hour, I probably have time to make one more page, and then we'll have to return to the project later. And I'll have to finish, I'll probably finish this book without documenting the rest of the work, which will be an advantage for me because I'll then have two hands to work with in creating it rather than only one and the other given to holding the cell phone to document the creation. but it'll be a disadvantage to you in not being able to participate, in the process and fully engage in all of the economic factors, that will continue to contribute to the making, just as they have done today. But you'll have to trust me that, there's always squash to bake, and there's always a dog to care for, and there's always an infrastructural issue to be dealt with, and there's always this is Saturday, and Lori, my wife, is on her way to Farmington to take a test to become certified to teach English. She was teaching history and social studies here in the Window Rock district, but because of the shortage of teachers, and particularly the shortage of teachers here on the Navajo Nation and other reservations in the United States, she was relocated to a different department out of a necessity of need, and again, you could see that as you can see that as whatever you wanted to see it as, but it relates to the economics and of infrastructural development and resources that that are part of the material conditions under which the community here lives and operates, and she'll be gone most of the day, and that gives me a time to do this work, which sort of changes, the the conditions under which I create my sort of self-regulating economy of art making and documenting, but also changes my relationship with the rest of the household economy, right? Because since she won't be here today, and it's reasonably cold outside, I don't want to go shopping for groceries or retrieve the laundry, because to do so I would have to leave the dogs outside, and if it snows and you can see that it's cloudy, I don't want them out there getting cold, and so we'll probably have to figure out a way of doing laundry during the week and getting the fact of the water being turned off for 5 days in a row also makes me hesitant to go grocery shopping this weekend, because if I can't wash vegetables and and I can't really cook anything new, there's no point in having the resources of food that'll merely spoil over the course of that time. So in addition to the test taking, changes in time and economic organization, there's also the challenges that arise in relationship to this week's new conditions without water to some extent. So once again, my viewers and my audience will have to trust that all of these other economic issues will continue to arise as I continue to complete the fabrication of this notebook off camera. And I guess you can imagine whatever conditions those might continue to be. All right, so as you can see from what will be a very quick demonstration by flipping the pages of this book, I've completed what will become this Asylum notebook, subset Rorschach notebook. And you'll have to take my word for it, but I've completed it with the same level of competence, as you can see, that I began it with, and the level of competence, or if you prefer, the level of incompetence, or the level of technical inability, resulted, in the beginning from, a number of overdetermined sets. Like one of those sets is my lack of fine motor coordination. And this has always been a problem in craft for me, and one of the reasons why I'm not, a good drawer, because it's not the same set of constraints, but there are some of the constraints that I have in writing letters that belong to this cluster of cognitive and physical embodiments that articulate my being as a material subject in the world, that I describe as dysgraphia, but that really exceed the bounds of that particular definition. But some of those limitations also apply to limitations that I have in fine motor coordination in drawing. So that's one set of the conditions under which the technical limitations of the creation occurred. And then the second, of course, is that I was working with one hand to make the production, and I was filming with the other hand. And so I've attempted to, even when I was using two hands, and the process did go much quicker, you'll have to take my word for it, in using two hands, but I've attempted to maintain that same level of technical expertise or lack of expertise in creating the volume. So it's finished and accomplished in much a shorter amount of time than it would have been if I had to continue filming beyond my hour limit. And I thought that I would do something with the cover. Now, this is going to be difficult again because now I'm filming again, and now I only have one hand to work with in constructing the material. But I thought it might be interesting to give it. Well, I'm not sure if this is even going to work. All right, so this is the final version of the cover of the notebook that had been intended to include a facsimile or fake version of the type of Rorschach images that I created while I was in a metropolitan hospital. And the only problem with this little book now is I think the cover is actually too nice. The design is too good for the purpose that I had intended, and I may have to make another small notebook to use as the material for these Rorschachs, and I may have to use this for something else, but we'll see.